Thank you to the representatives for being here and for your service to our community. You have a difficult and time-consuming job, and we appreciate you taking the time to be with us on your weekend. And we are missing one representative who's just going to be a couple minutes late. I want to thank our sponsors, Black Hills Energy and the Southwest Iowa Association of Realtors and Advanced Southwest Iowa Corporation. I also want to thank Dr. Murillo and her team for hosting us here at Wilson Middle School. And then thank you to the audience for attending and participating today. Our goal, questions from the audience can be submitted on the question cards provided. We probably won't have time to address all of your questions, so we will group questions by topic and select a question that best represents that topic. Our goal is to address a wide variety of topics today. On the back of the question cards, you can leave your contact information and the name of the legislator. If we are unable to get to your question, I will give your card to one of the representatives. Please make sure you designate which representative you would like to reach out to you. Out of respect for everyone in attendance, I ask all of you in attendance to follow the format that I just described. Please do not raise your hand or blurt out your question. We only ask questions that have been submitted on the cards. At this time, I would like to introduce our moderator. This year, moderators for our legislative hockey events are community members who are current participants or alumni of the Leadership Council Us program. Leadership Council Us is a 9-month program offered by the Chamber of Commerce designed to develop leaders within our community. Participants of the Leadership Council Us learn about the rich history of our community, develop leadership skills, examine critical issues and local changes, and discover opportunities to become more involved. Please help me welcome today's moderator, Reverend Dr. Vergery Sanford. Dr. Sanford is a pastor at the Broadway Christian Church and a participant of the current Leadership Council Class of 37. Let's give a warm round of applause.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Thank the Chamber for inviting me to be a part of this activity today. We want to thank our legislators for being here, our legislators for being here. Thank all of you for coming out this morning. We want to start with a brief round of introductions, followed by questions submitted by the audience, and then there will be time at the end for a brief meet and greet. We'll try to limit responses to the audience questions to 2 minutes, but we will allow for additional time when needed. In order to ensure a productive and respectful dialogue, we kindly ask all attendees to be courteous and respectful to our legislators and the audience members in attendance throughout the event. We ask that you just be kind to each other. As a pastor, I can say, be kind, show love to each other as we go through, we're all going through difficult times. So let's be kind to each other and respectful. So now we turn to our legislators. We ask that you would give us 2 minutes telling us about your district, the district you represent, the committees you serve on, and anything else you might be worth sharing with us today. Whoever would like to start first?
Yeah, I was getting that kind of settled in, so.
State Representative Josh Turek. I am ranking member on Health and Human Services budget, also Health and Human Services policy. I am also on Natural Resources, State Government, and Veterans Affairs. And once again, I want to thank all of you for coming out. I really believe that democracy dies in the dark, and so it's awesome that we're having such a big turnout that we're getting a bigger room. So thanks for spending your Saturdays with us. Last 2 weeks have been quite eventful, at least for me in the minority party. I always feel like I'm more sad than I am happy when I come away from the week. However, I did have a handful of things that I was really thrilled with the last 2 weeks. One of which was in Ways and Means with a bill that had my name on it, a bill that I've been working for 3 years on. Representative Bobby Kaufman ended up running it through committee, which was to eliminate any sales tax on any mobility devices in driving adaptations. It's a huge barrier for disabled folks you can imagine if you're adapting a van or ramp access, sometimes those are at $20,000 to $30,000. So anything we can do to reduce that. And I also had another bill that doesn't have my name on it, but we ended up getting that through a floor vote, and we ended up passing that unanimously, which is a dock bill, which really we put forth mainly for border communities like Carter Lake, where you see a variance in standard from state to state. So that was really exciting for me, for a bill that I've worked on from the floor to make it unanimously out of the House, and now we're over in the Senate. I was working with the senator that is putting together that subcommittee. Also ended up having, in the last 2 weeks, had a meeting with the Attorney General about 504, which if any of you are interested, if there's a question about that, I can certainly talk about that. And I also ended up speaking to the governor as well. So eventful week, and thank you all for being here.
Dan Dawson said District 10, which is all Carter Lake and most of Council Bluffs. I chair the Tax Writing Committee of Ways and Means. I also sit on Judiciary, Veterans Affairs, and the Rural Rate Committee. I'll ditto everything Josh said about the last couple of weeks. The only thing I would add additionally is that oftentimes even the majority party will walk out sad as well too. Just trying to, it ain't easy around there, I'll tell you that. So the only thing additional from my standpoint is that as we talked about last time, the House and the Senate dropped probably the largest property tax reform in the last 50 years. The bills, we've taken a lot of public input the last couple of weeks. And I think there's been pretty good commentary. A lot of things we hit the mark on. Some things, the intent was there, but then it might come out in drafting, so we're starting to work on some clarifying language as well too. We're really getting some input from all stakeholders there. I think this next week you're going to start to see some action where we're going to start to have some subcommittees, get to some more public hearings wise, and start to really work through that product and see what the art of the possible is here on this. So I'm pretty excited about those opportunities, but there's a lot of things we got to work through as well too. TIP is a topic that's starting to really come up, even in the main property tax reform bill, not just a bill we have here at Council Bluffs as well too, which we're going to start holding some hearings on that. But the name of the game is basically trying to figure out tax policy as well as getting ready for that second funnel, which is just 2 weeks away, which means the bill has to get out of one chamber entirely over to the opposite chamber and through that committee, which is why we have some, more robust bill schedules this last week. I'm sure next week we're going to the same way as well too. So thank you all for coming.
Well, good morning, folks, and I'd like to echo my colleagues. Thank you for coming out here today. I know it's a very nice day outside, so you chose to spend your morning with us. So we appreciate that. My name is Matt Windschitl. I represent House District 15, which is all of Harrison County, and the central portion of Potawatomi County. I've been in the legislature for 19 years now. I also serve as majority leader of the Iowa House. That job, like any job in the legislature, comes with its own unique responsibilities. The main part of my job is once bills come out of committee, none of them go to the floor until I make the decision that we're going to take them to caucus, see how our caucus feels about it, see if they can be amended or adjusted, and then call them up on the floor for debate. This last few weeks has been extremely busy, so if you emailed me and you haven't heard back from me, I apologize. My days are literally slammed. From the moment I walk into the Capitol, I'm lucky if I can even get my password in my computer before somebody's walking into my office, or I've got another meeting, or we have to go to caucus and then potentially floor debate. And so just trying to keep on top of everything and keep the trains moving on time. So we've had a lot of bills that have passed out of committee. Actually, right now, we broke, I want to say, a 40 or 50-year record for how many bills have been introduced in the Iowa House. We're close to 1,000 right now, and that's not counting all of the House study bills. So that's a lot of different pieces of legislation to analyze and go through and make a decision on whether or not we need to be doing that many bills, or whether we need to be focusing on the main priorities. As Senator Dawson said, we're coming up on the second funnel in 2 weeks. And so my objective this coming week is to pass as many of our House files as we companies sending us a whole bunch of their Senate files we don't have companions on, so that we can continue to work together. I do want to give you a quick update. I stopped down and saw Representative Siegrist yesterday. He is doing well. For those of you who don't know, he did get an infection. It kind of got a little hairy there for a little bit, but he's doing well. He's in good spirits. He wanted me to tell him hi. He's sorry he can't be here. He is on the road to recovery, but it's going to take a little bit of time for him. They had to do a couple different surgeries to get the infection off his body, but he's in really good spirits. And like I was with Turek a few weeks ago, I took him a big old chocolate shake at McDonald's. By the time that I sat with him about an hour, he had 2/3 of it gone, and he was asking me all kinds of questions because, like any legislator, he's a nerd, and because he can't be at the Capitol for debate, he watches it online. So he's like, what happened here? What happened there? So he's doing very well. But other than that, I appreciate you all coming out this morning, and I look forward to your questions, and hopefully we can provide some very adequate answers for you. Thank you.
We want to allow our representatives a minute or two to talk about bills that are dead, so we don't have to address those during that question. So if you all would like to talk about that.
Talk about any bills, or what was, sorry.
Talk about bills that are dead.
Oh, God. Hopefully half. Let's see. I'm trying to think of some, I mean, some of those we covered last time here. I don't know what would be. Oh, anything new has died in the last couple of weeks. That's kind of the problem with this. I mean, so going to this is probably we can probably give you more clarity in the next 2 weeks, right? Because all the bills that made out of committee, which would have been 3 weeks ago, those are ones that are still alive. So now the next time app is April 5th or 6th or whatever that would be there. So this is everything that made it out of committee is technically alive. And now the name of the game is it has to get out of that chamber and then over to the next one, to the next committee. So the next time when bills die will be 2 weeks from now. But anything that was alive 2 weeks ago is still alive right now. Anything that was dead 2 weeks ago is still dead right now. Minus a couple things always time to rear their heads through an amendment or something along those lines there. But for the most part, that's a good rule of thumb there on that.
Quite frankly, as majority leader, like I was saying, one of my jobs is to read through everything that's come out of committee, and one of the more difficult parts of my job is having to tell people no. So as far as bills that are dead, if I had actually brought my legal sheet that I call my matrix, which the staff and I work on, we've got a certain coding system in how we analyze different bills that come out of committee. I've got so many bills in what I call purgatory, that is probably about what's on that, I don't know, 600-700 bills are on that one. There's too many to actually pinpoint and say this one, that one, without me actually having all of that information right in front of me. But yeah, you've got a bunch of people, a bunch of ideas, but they're not always ready for prime time.
In addition, I'd say too, like if one of us was a committee chair, it'd be a lot more succinct to answer because I can tell you what's, if I was a committee chair, I can tell you what's dead in the committee. Fortunately, Ways and Means, everything's alive to the end, so I don't have a good visibility on some other ones of what's dead or not, but like you have education chair here, a state government chair, that'd be a lot more succinct answer because we'd have better visibility of what the hot topic ones are, the ones that, as a chair, I killed in the committee one way or the other. Unfortunately, everything in my committee, for better or for worse, is alive till the end, so I just have to deal with that.
Let me ask you this, or Senator. You have over 127 bills in your committee right now?
No.
Well, Bobby Kaufman has that in his Ways and Means committee, so count yourself lucky.
That's the essence of having 100 versus 50.
Yeah.
No, I think it'll be easier, honestly, if we do get a question about a bill that's dead. I mean, as Representative Windschitl stated, 1,000 bills have gone through the process. And at times, depending on the committee chair, they're saying, well, let's see this through subcommittee. Well, let's at least put it to the committee. And so I'll show some bipartisanship here. I don't envy your job. I know that sometimes you're holding back the dam with the amount of bills that we actually could be seeing and doing. I think you do a good job with that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We'll jump right in then with our first question. It's from Dirk Waller, the future of education. And the question is, with the flurry of anti-education legislation from the state and national level, could each of you clarify your thoughts on the future of education in Iowa? We're asking you to say it in 2 minutes.
Sure. I'm not sure what specifically would be the flurry of anti-education bills that that person.
Ask an educator.
I have talked to many educators, and I've been many times.
Yeah, but you still did the opposite of what they wanted.
We have our questions here, and that's how we'll move forward today.
As far as the prospect for the future of education, as always, and I believe this is bipartisan across the aisle, we want to make sure that Iowa has the best education system possible. We want to make sure that every student has the opportunity to get the education they deserve, to make the decisions for themselves in conjunction with their parents for the best educational opportunities. And we want to make sure that that education is a quality education. There has been a push to make sure that our institutions of education, whether that be K-12 or higher education, whether that be community college or universities, private colleges, that they're actually institutions of education and not indoctrination. And so we have...
Bullshit! Bullshit! That is bullshit! I cannot believe it. Did you go to public education? Did you go to a public school growing up? I'm sorry. That is bullshit. And that is something that Republicans are doing on it. That is wrong! I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that. Sorry. But a lie's a lie. I gotta call it out. I'm sorry.
As far as my own education, no, ma'am. I did not go to public education. I was homeschooled.
Explains it right there. Right there.
So, as I was saying, we want to make sure that our institutions of education are providing the best and highest quality education for our students, whether they choose to go to a private school, or whether they choose to go to a public school. And again, in my 19 years of service, I've represented many different school districts in the different redistrictings that I've had. I've talked with educators countless times. So we are trying to provide the best and quality education as possible. One of the things that I'd like us to get settled very soon would be setting the education funding, or SSA, for this next school year. We do have a little bit of difference with the Senate, when they passed. We did send them our proposal. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to come to a complete agreement on it yet, but we are tirelessly working at that and continuing to take input and feedback from folks in our districts and across the state of Iowa. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go back and address a comment that was made over there in defense of my colleague. I think people look at education a different way, right? If there's one arc over the state of Iowa in the last 8 years, it's not one size fits all, okay? So I don't appreciate a disparaging comment about someone who was homeschooled with the response of, that explains it, okay? There are people in this town who have been homeschooled. There are people in this town who go to a private school. There are people in this town who go over to Omaha for schooling. And there are people in this town who enjoy our very good public schools. Whatever your education is, and whatever your background is, has nothing to do about content or character or what you bring to the Iowa Capitol. Because in the end, every one of us has been out there door knocking all kinds of doors through every election cycle. And we don't get to pick and choose if we go to a door where someone has, through a public education, a private education, goes over to Omaha, or goes to public school here in Council Bluffs. And we all do the best job that we can, listening to all the critique and all the input and all the goals that people have at the door to do the best job that we can. Now, you might not like where the result ends up there, but it doesn't mean anyone up here or anyone in this audience is any less than anyone else because of where they were educated at. Now, when you ask about what the future of education here is in Iowa, Now, I understand that the intent of the questioner nationally is with, federal level, looking at everything, the Department of Education and stuff like that, right? I get it. Just like we dealt with this 2 weeks ago, a lot of people come in here hot, and they're coming here mad about something that's going on at the federal level. I can tell you most days when we walk into the Capitol, probably darn near every day, just like this weekend, where the first conversations are, how was your week? We don't sit around and talk about what we saw on Fox News or MSNBC or what Trump's doing, right? We're trying to do the best job we can. You might not like the outcome in the end, but in the end, I will tell you this. There isn't anyone who walks in the Iowa legislature, it's like, man, what can we do to put our kids into a detriment in the future? No one. Now, everyone might have a different foxhole where they come from on what education looks like. We try to do the best we can every day. But understand as well, too, that we have a lot of parents who complain to us a lot of times about a lot of things. Some of the bills that get filed are a result of those complaints. Do they go far? No. But a lot of times parents want to be heard, and that's how we raise topics. But at the end of the day, what we are able to pass does make our kids a better place. Because the reality in the end, all of us get old. All of us are going to depend on our kids to either have a job, pay taxes, support our community, take care of us in a nursing home. There's not one of us here that wants to see a lesser education because we need our kids in the future. So.
We may actually agree on the situation of what's happening with education, but I want to double down on what Senator Dawson said. We can disagree on policy, but we certainly shouldn't be taking personal shots. I'll say Representative Windschitl has been one of the most respectful members in the majority party. He's a genuine institutionalist. I actually have family members that are currently homeschooling their kids. I went to public school. I graduated from public school proudly, but I also went to private school because I was bullied so badly. So I don't think that we necessarily need to vilify any particular, certainly individuals up here.
And I apologize.
Excellent. So I hope we can keep a certain level of civility. And I mean that specifically for anyone here that's on my side. I understand there's a lot of anger out there, but let's keep a certain level of civility. In terms of what's happening, yes, there's some genuine concern about what's happening at the national level. We're looking at the erosion of the Department of Education. Believe me, as somebody with disabilities, vocational rehabilitation services, individual with disability services, that's where that's probably going to affect the most. In terms of statewide, yeah, I think it is a concern. I think you can look at almost every single one of these that we've done, you guys have heard me say, that it was a point of personal pride for Iowans to be #1 in public education. We have precipitously slid, now we're in the mid-20s. What that reason is, I think we would possibly disagree. My position is we should fully fund our education. I firmly believe that the greatest indicator of future success in life is access to quality education. And I think that that should be irregardless of where you're based on property tax. I think that should, all of those things, wherever you are in this state, rural, urban, you come from a rich family or poor family, you should have access to quality education. Now, for me, from my side, I think that we are currently underfunding our, I'm not going to say drastically, but I do think you can look at the numbers. $1,200 less than the national average is what we spend, and I think that we need to do a better job. At the House, we're looking at funding of 2.25. The Senate, I know they're talking about 2%. Democrats would put forth an idea of 5%. I think if we're going to fund at the level of what we're doing with private schools, then we should absolutely fund our public schools. And where it affects almost the most is a community like ours. And you can speak to our superintendent, Dr. Murillo, and she will tell you, because we've lost 47 students, I think, this year, we're looking at 1% funding. That is certainly not enough. It's not enough to keep up with inflation. And so we need to do all that we can to ensure that every single kid in this community ends up having quality education. That's my thoughts.
I just want to say that we do understand that you're very passionate about these topics, but we thank you for being respectful to each other and to our legislators. So we're going to move on to our next question. House Bill 617 would give cities more tools to incentivize housing development. Can you give us an update on the bill and what you think it will do for the community?
617 617 is a bill that Representative Siegrist initially sponsored. I co-sponsored it with him along with Representative Bobby Kaufman. This is a bill to try to address the lack of development that we are seeing here in Council Bluffs. The idea is that we could have a 20-year TIF that you could then move it to just 20% affordable housing, attach it to 2020, and it would apply to areas that are within these school districts, or sorry, within these city limits for at least 20 years. One of the problems, and we all can see this, is certainly in my lifetime and all of our lifetimes, probably all of yours, we've seen very minimal growth in Council Bluffs. Meanwhile, we've seen Omaha nearly double. We've seen all the development happening out there. A lot of that, I believe, is our inability to compete on some of these issues. I think they've got more tools in the shed, whether it's land banks, whether it's sewer, the SIDs, whether it is, they have the ability to extend up to 20 years with it. We only have the 10. We have to have more tools in the shed to be able to do that. And I think that this bill would give communities like Council Bluffs an amazing opportunity to be able to stimulate growth, which would be able to grow our population for the first time basically in 50 or 60 years, and be able to add to our property tax base. It has moved out of subcommittee. I spoke to Representative Kaufman. He is in full support of it. I expect that probably this week or next week we'll move that out of committee. And I'm curious to see what Senator Dawson thinks about it, because he's going to have a lot to say.
Yeah, I will, again, ditto everything you just said there. We filed a quasi-companion bill over in the Senate to this as well, too. It just got filed this week. And I think this ties into the larger property tax discussion here. I don't want to make any judgments on it. So the larger property tax reform bill, one of the things that we're coming up with the most, or some of the biggest feedback we're actually getting, which I was kind of shocked a little bit, is on tax increment financing, what Josh is talking about right here. And that's become a statewide issue. Well then, all these things are starting to come into play a little bit. One, the primary discussion point we're having up there for two big topics on the property tax bill is how that affects tax increment financing urban renewal areas across the state, because we have over 3,000 some different districts. Could be nothing more than 3 or 4 blocks, or it could be a whole addition. So we're working through that. Well then, out of, as predicted, out of the one side of the ball field comes into discussion of, well, what about perpetual TIFs? Or what about TIFs where your entire town is basically TIFed out, right? And then we have what I think is very reasonable, some things like this, to try to go back and unlock some of these areas that are inside areas that otherwise wouldn't qualify. So this is all going to the blender right now. We're trying to work ourselves through a little bit. And I know, I'm going to imagine, because I'm in this boat as well too, probably about 95% of people in here have never even heard of a tax increment finance district until today, or urban renewal district, other than Matt and Brandon right there. Yeah. So, anyways, essentially what the big rub is on, or there's two ways to explain TIF. The good thing is, like, if you're going to put an addition into an area, right, and you need to run sewers and roads and stuff like that, what you would often do is, as opposed to a building going up or something along those lines, the easiest way to explain it, and then paying taxes to your city, your school, your county and everything else. The revenues generated from that basically go in to pay off that infrastructure. So it's like a self-promulgating thing, right? And then once that TIF expires, then all those revenues go back into the appropriate entities there. Oftentimes, what we've seen across the state, and there are some towns that basically put their entire town into a TIF, is that, and I think there's a lot of validity to this there. When you do this, one of the things is the school portion of the bill, right? And but that's where I do have some, not with this bill right here, but an entire discussion of TIF. You know, when, especially on the residential side, some of these areas, what they have done, and I'm not gonna disparage any government entities out there in different spots of the state, but the problem is when you have a population of 2, 3, 4,000, or whatever it might be, well, those are a lot of families in there, and they should probably be paying into the school portion there a little bit, right? Fill up the school coffers on that. A lot of entities have kind of abused TIP there, and so all TIP discussions bring in a larger TIP discussion up there. But I do think with the scope of larger property tax, we can get something done on this year. I'm hoping there's some type of grand bargain where we can accomplish a lot of things at once, give the cities and counties the tools that they need, but also make sure the schools aren't getting shortchanged in the process as well too. It's just tip after tip after tip, and you know, basically schools need to go to an additional levy, which is a shift on property taxes to the rest of us to make up the difference there, which is a good long-term policy here. So we'll see where that goes. I mentioned subcommittee's got a bill filed this week, but in my wheelhouse of Ways and Means, probably TIP is the #2 discussion point right now, for better or worse.
Okay. Sorry, that's one of mine. So I know just enough about this bill to be dangerous. I think that it's a good idea. I'm looking forward to seeing how the committee discussions go, and then taking into further consideration within the caucus and within the House body. But just to give you a little bit of mechanics on how this works, and Senator Dawson had alluded to this a little bit ago. There's 3 main committees that do not have a fall deadline. And what that means is they can file bills, they can draw up study bills, and anything that has been sent to those committees does not have to be out before the first or second fall. And that would be the Ways and Means Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and then Government Oversight. So whether this bill moves out of committee next week or not, it's still a live round throughout session. And that is because anything that deals with appropriations, we don't want that to be a rushed decision. Anything that deals with taxation, we don't want that to be a rushed decision. So I say that just to give you an idea, like these bills don't have to, or this bill specifically does not have to be out by the next funnel deadline. They're funnel proof already, just by the fact that they're in Ways and Means. So I am looking forward to the discussion, but as Senator Dawson said, when you start talking TIF, look, communities that use it and do it right is fantastic, but there have been abuses in the past. You do end up taking certain parcels of land off the tax rolls, which is a tax shift to the other landowners and property taxpayers. So it has to be used wisely, appropriately, for the proper economic development purposes. And like I said, I think this concept, it's a new wrinkle in the TIF rule, but I think that it might be something that would be valuable for communities like Council Bluffs and other communities that find themselves sitting right next to a major metropolitan area, and they want to continue to grow.
Thank you. I just want to follow up real quick with just some stats of why we're trying to do this right. Is right now we're looking at a vacancy rate in homes of less than 1%, like less than 0.5%, 1.7% rental vacancy. If we can get this development done, I think there's a variety of ways that we can do that, inclusive. I mean, if this isn't even condensed enough or small enough, I think we could look at a pilot program, or we could look at just this applying to just border communities, because we are in a unique position going head to head with another state and other state policies. And I think any opportunity that we've got to be able to grow our tax base by conceivably 8,000 people, or be able to add $10 million to revenue, additional revenue, I think is a good thing for us to look at.
Our next question seems more like a statement, so I'll just read it. It's about the supervisors. It says, "Thank you, Majority Leader Windschitl and Senator Coley, on your work to support Potawatomi County's county supervisors at large." And that's from Starling Purdy. Our next question is from Hillary Parker. It's House Bill 710. Says this addresses private boat dock construction and choice of materials to align Iowa with the other 49 states. The bill has passed through the House unanimously. Could you please offer insight as to what it's going to take to get it to pass the legislative session, or this legislative session?
Okay.
No, by all means, feel free.
Oh, okay. I mean, that was, it's a bill I've worked on really hard. It's, yeah, we put that for you. Natural resources, that is basically, right now, as I had mentioned, where you really see it is in a place like Carter Lake, where you have a different standard, literally neighbor to neighbor. But what you have is, Iowa is the only state out of all the 50 states that prevents what you can do on your boat docks in terms of, right now, the only thing that you can do is soft-sided materials. So if you want to have hard enclosement on your dock, you cannot do that. So it's really unnecessary regulation, unnecessary bureaucracy, and especially if you're in a situation like Carter Lake, or even us with a border community, I think people should be able to do that. So we did. We passed that unanimously out of Natural Resources. We passed it unanimously out of the House, and it is now moved to subcommittee in the Senate. I just spent some time with Senator DeWitt looking at some language, some amendment language to tighten it up even further. That's where it's at in the process. I hope that we can move to the Senate, but I guess pass it to you. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, you said most of it right there. I know I talked to a couple individuals from Carter Lake here, one Lake and one Lake Carter Lake here about a month ago there at the Capitol for your first subcommittee. I think it's a good bill there. I don't have any more thing to add to that. Like I said, you know, the thing will be now just get the Senate moving it through subcommittee and through committee process here in the next 2 weeks here.
Yeah, I think we're going to do subcommittee on Tuesday, I believe.
Good idea, and that's why we passed it out of the House unanimously. In my time of service, I've often found we've got 9 volumes of Iowa code. When I say volumes, I mean they're like really big, thick books of Iowa code. We find archaic laws all the time, and you try to scratch your head sometimes and look back and be like, why in the heck did they do that? Why is that in there? This is one of those one-offs where when there were folks from the council bluffs area that came and spoke to me about it, I was like, what, you can only put canvas on your dock? You can't put a, aluminum siding or anything like that? And they're like, no. I was like, why? We don't know. I was like, that's stupid. Let's get the bill done. So I'm happy to have it supported. If the Senate needs to put their fingerprints on it, if you will, that's fine. If they make some changes to it that aren't egregious, we'll have to take it back up in the House and send it back down to the governor. So it's just common sense legislation.
Questions from Representative Jacob concerning libraries. How do you plan on protecting the public libraries from bills like HF 41 and HF 18?
I have not memorized all of the bill numbers just yet. There's over 1,000. I have not had a chance to look at all of them. So I'll speak what I believe that person is referencing. There are 2 separate proposals that came out of the House Education Committee. One of them is to say that any libraries that are associated with the National Library Association, they cannot receive Enrich Iowa funds for those local libraries if they're part of a national organization. And I'm trying to get a better understanding why the legislation was proposed. I think I've got somewhat of an understanding of it, but at this point, with those bills being out of education, I've got them in my whole pile in the House right now. I think that while they're, the intent behind it, I have pause on them right now. I think the intent behind it is not clear enough or understood enough, and I don't want to do anything that would jeopardize our local libraries from being able to get the funding, not only on a national level, but on a state level, and quite frankly, it's a public library. I know people don't want certain materials being available to minors and things of that nature. We did do some stuff with school libraries last year, and I'll probably get in trouble with some of my caucus for saying this, but that's okay. It's a public library. If you want to go there and you want to read whatever books you want to read, by all means. If you as a parent want to take your child there, if you as a parent want to take your child there and your child has an interest in certain subject matter, that's up to you as a parent to make that decision for what you allow your child to read.
Yes.
So oftentimes, and this, Josh, don't tell anybody in my caucus I said this, please. Okay?
No, that's right.
Okay, yeah, don't make me feel better.
What's right is right.
hypocrisy abounds in politics. Oftentimes we find ourselves saying, parents know best. Parents make the option or make the decision. Parents have the options. And then on the other hand, we say, but we as a state are going to tell parents what that option might be. Same thing when it comes to books and libraries. I can understand not wanting to have obscene materials in the school public library, okay? There are examples of that, and I won't go into all of it, but there was some literature that, quite frankly, shouldn't have been in those libraries. But when it comes to a public library, parents should be able to make the decision,
Yes.
not the government.
Yes.
And so I've actually posed this question to my caucus a couple of times this session, especially with the volume of bills that we have. Are we big government Republicans, or are we limited government Republicans? Having over 1,000 bills in play in the Iowa House right now, that's a lot of code. That's a lot of proposals. And I used this visual example with one of my colleagues just this last week, who was specifically asking about these library bills. We were in my office, and in my office I've got a display case, and that's where I have all the volumes of the Iowa Code. Every 2 years we get a new set of the Iowa Code. When I started 19 years ago, we had 5 volumes. 5. We have 9 now. Every time we propose a bill, well, it may be well-intentioned. All we're doing is putting more things on the books and say, you as Iowans can't do X. You can't do Y. Absolutely. So, we get it.
Thank you.
Yeah, since those are House bills, I don't typically comment on those until they come over to the Senate, just out of collegial respect. I let each chamber, I'll take some ownership of the Senate stuff there, but I let each chamber do their own due diligence first before it comes over to the other one, and then I make comment. I would say, well, 2 things. One, Matt, kind of, man, you spoke deep to me there for a minute, because I say the same thing too a lot of times. Like I understand a lot of times you have a constituent who has this complaint, like about earlier on, right? You know, like, hey, I want something done. A lot of times you just file a bill just to give them their voice, right? Does it ever become law? No, it doesn't. You know, but a lot of times people just want to have their voice heard and say, hey, this is a, you know, an issue or something like that. Once in a while, some of these constituent complaints actually do materialize into law. It's like, hey, that person's onto something we didn't know about. A lot of times it's more just a complaint here and everything. Like I told you before, I think a couple of weeks ago, I think it's hard for us to kind of go back to the trough on some of these issues 2 or 3 or 4 times. You know, on you know, particularly the book issue, and there is a difference. I know some people weren't happy a few years ago about the public school books, but the reality is your kid has to go to school, right? Your kid has to go to library time. So there's a difference between the materials that are there where you have to do something versus a public library where you willingly go to that area to find a book and everything. So I think those are 2 different topics there, and they should be treated as such as well too. Not commenting about any House bills because they would know better where the origination of those things come from. But there's a difference between public libraries and public school libraries. Big difference.
I don't say this all the time, but I completely agree with Representative Windschitl. I appreciate his comments. You guys have heard me say this here before. I am not for book bans. I'm for protecting our libraries and to limit them particularly. And there is a distinction there of a public library. That is for sure. We should certainly not be limiting what is in there. Let parents parent. And I will correlate this to, we ran a bill this week. We actually voted on it in the House, and it was to try to, initially the way the bill was written was to try to ban tanning beds for kids that are below the age of 18, because we have 5th highest rates of melanoma, right, have cancer crisis. Well, we ended up changing the bill significantly so that we actually don't have a ban on a specific age. What we have now is informed consent. And so what you have to have is the parent go in there, regardless of what the kid's age is, and say, I understand that I'm exposing my kid to a cancerous carcinogen, and I'm okay with that. The kid's okay with that. Well, I think if we're going to have that as the standard, well then, on something that is exposing them to theoretically harmful cancer, well, then we certainly have to have the exact same standard on books.
And I mean no disrespect if I call Josh Josh and Dan, we're friends, and so it just sometimes the title's a title for all human beings, for all items. So what Josh just said is an absolute great juxtaposition and feeds into what I was saying. When that bill came out of committee, the tanning bed bill, it was saying basically like you couldn't allow your child to tan under the age of 16. If you did, you had to sign the consent. And so that's, I mean, that is a great side-by-side example of let parents make the decision, right? So we ended up taking the 16-year-old age limit out because the discussions in our caucus were like, hey, parents know best, let parents make the decision, right? But then, again, with library bills, it's like, hey, parents know best, but we don't want to have this book in the library. Like, we're going to tell you what you can think. And it just, all right, I want to rant through
Keep going. Woo!
All right, our next question is from Jerry Richardson. It's House File 882. Says, HF 882, previously HF 729, creates the railroad tracks, overpass, and underpass fund under the control of the DOT. HF 882 has passed out of committee. House Representative Turek, Windschitl, and she has Siegrist here, the bill sponsors. Will you vote for this bill, which could really help alleviate the blocked railroad crossing issues here in Council Bluffs? And Senator Dawson, if the bill passes the House, will you vote for it and encourage your fellow senators to support it also?
I'll start. This is obviously Representative Siegrist's bill, really. A lot of us are aware of what's going on. We have this area in Council Bluffs where you end up with, we refer to it as the triangle of death, where you have three ways, the railroads are blocked, they're not following standards. Sometimes, I mean, myself, when I was out there campaigning, I ended up getting stuck for 45 minutes legitimately and could not get back to my car, just sitting there waiting. This is beyond just a convenience issue. This is a legitimate safety issue when people not only can't get to work and back or to school and back in a timely manner, but when you can't get an ambulance in or out, this is a very, very serious concern. And so what this bill would look to do would be to get some funding so that in areas like this, we can address this. Also, just so you know, myself and Representative Siegrist, we had a meeting with the Attorney General. She has contacted the CEO of Union Pacific. We are working to try to address this problem so that they are at least following the code and that there's going to be some level of enforcement mechanism, because they are certainly not following the standard of, I believe it's maximum of 15 minutes or 20 minutes on the crossings. As I can personally attest to, there have been, individuals sitting there for 30, 40, 50 minutes. And we heard firsthand in the meeting with the Attorney General of a woman that was there and could not get the ambulance out because of what's happening. So this would be a great bill and absolutely support it.
The answer is yes, I'll support it. I think there's a lot of different work that needs to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take the ball away from Josh.
No.
Yes, I'll support it. There is, it's a very complicated issue. Now, please don't yell at me or pull this against me. I did work for Union Pacific for 12 years, and I did work in the Council Bluffs yard, both the North Yard and the main yard. And it is a prevalent issue. It happens not just here in Council Bluffs, it happens in other communities. Boone was finally able to get their overpass put in, so it would stop congestion in Boone. That's another hub for Union Pacific. And so there's a couple different ways we can go about it. This bill is probably one thing that could potentially help, but you also have to talk about train length. When I was down here, what was it, like 3 weeks ago or something like that, I got stuck on 16th Street, and it's what it is a train length issue. You've got a major hub coming right through Council Bluffs here, and they've got the double main coming through, and the trains are literally doubled in size, right? You've got a engine that's in the middle. So everybody's seeing the engine that's in the middle, and then the rest of the train behind it. That's called a mid-dupe or mid-DPU, the distributed power unit. And I'm not trying to fault the railroads, but they are looking at ways of cutting costs by manpower, by doubling these trains up, with the advancement of technology. They can have those distributed power units that actually are running, and they help distribute the load on the train cars. But when you have those trains that are 1.5 miles long, and for whatever reason they have to stop, maybe got a break in the train line, maybe there was something on the tracks and they stopped, I mean, that can take hours for a conductor to get back there, walk back, find what the problem is, try and fix it. And so it's a multifaceted issue, and like I said, I think this is one of those that, yes, this may be beneficial and may help, but there's other issues that are out there.
Yeah, I'm just reading the bill right now. I like it when it's a 3-paragraph bill and read the explanation in all matter of 2 minutes there. Just on first blush it, I like the bill. It looks like it makes the city put 50% into the fund, so it's not just a state-only thing, there's some local skin in the game there. I'll have to figure out what the funding mechanism is, if it's an appropriation or along those lines, but it is an issue, you know, especially, but to Matt's point, in reality, we all cannot forget, you know, our heritage as residents of Council Bluffs is this is a railroad town, right? You know, that's why we have the switches here and everything else. I mean, we were the golden spike that started the westward expansion here in this area. So with that, you know, has to be some mindfulness as the infrastructure that we do have around here, but particularly the, you know, when the Avenue G viaduct went in a few years ago, that was great. I think the south side of town could use some relief as well too. The switch yard down there, especially with the semi trucks as well too. They're trying to maneuver around on that road. It gets backed up really quick.
Yeah, go ahead. This, you know, the overpass we can all recognize is the long-term solution, but that is going to be the case. It is going to be long-term. In the short term, we have asked Union Pacific for some common sense solutions, which would, one, be that at least one of the exits are not blocked at one time. That's common sense. You can have one, you can have two, but you can't have all three. And secondly, we have asked them to, they can do this, to provide at least signage so that if you're at one of the areas that's blocked, it would indicate to you where the exit would be that you can leave from. So those are things that we have talked to the Attorney General with.
Thank you. Next question is from Jeff Schubeck. Senate File 6003. Why would the legislation want to take away the option for schools and cities to have developers seeking millions in tax incentives to be forced to use contractors that have training in an apprenticeship?
It was the bill from last week. It was the
Okay,
amendment.
yeah. So a few years ago, and here's the history of that, people have their own disagreement on one way or the other, right? A few years ago, probably about 19 or 2020, somewhere around then, there were what we call project labor agreements, PLAs, right? And what those were in some areas of the state, seeing across the United States as well too, is where when a government entity was going to issue out a bid for whatever project might be, part of that was that you could only use unionized labor, which cuts out half of the workforce there in Iowa. We have a lot of private companies as well too, right? So about 5 years ago, the legislature came in and we, except for Josh, banned PLAs, saying that you have to look at all construction bids as opposed to just narrowing them down to labor. It's actually been a quiet issue until this last year popped up, and at least one city, if not, I'm not sure two, it actually goes back to tax increment financing here again. It's kind of funny how this is a topic of conversation this year, but it hasn't been other years, where a few entities tried to do a workaround to the state law on prohibition on PLAs. And they tried to insert PLAs inside of the tax increment financing district there. So what we did last week was to prohibit that workaround as well for the intent of law that we passed back in 2019.
About apprenticeships, man.
What was that?
The apprenticeship part of it is essentially to where these municipalities don't have to, before it used to be a requirement, whether it's union or non-union, the folks had to be trained that were doing the work. I mean, a lot of times these projects are once in a lifetime things. And now it's kind of taken away the training at the required training or apprenticeship. And there's apprenticeships in union and non-union, by the way.
Yeah.
But the folks need to be, that are building these buildings, once in a lifetime buildings, these buildings need to be done right. You can go up to Sioux City, that jail up there, and see kind of a shit show, you know what I mean, when things aren't done right. And I guess that's just what I'm asking is why would we want to dumb down our workforce for public buildings?
Well, I don't think it's, point well taken there on that. I think there's the legislative history in the last few years is trying to raise apprenticeship programs as opposed to maybe what you're saying right there. So I understand from your viewpoint, I think from its legislative viewpoint, where this is like a 2 or 3 year thing on apprenticeships is where we're trying to work and raise those up there to build out a workforce, and maybe those two are getting intermixed in this discussion there. So
The legislation, as Senator Dawson said, it's not intended to tell cities and counties that they can't use union labor. It's just to say that when they're using TIF dollars, that it can't be solely skewed towards one side or the other.
I'm just talking about the apprenticeship requirements is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about union or non-union, because non-union has apprenticeship too. Then I want to get away from the union, non-union thing.
it'd be fair, Jeff, like what you're saying right there, that wasn't the thrust of the discussion this last week. So maybe there should have been more discussion on that point. It just went back to the whole PLA thing back to 2019. So.
Yep. We're just trying to make sure that everybody out there has a fair shot to bid on these contracts and to be able to do the quality construction job that needs to be done within the local communities.
And there's some, as folks say here, bad hombres in town right now. And they're not city projects, but there's projects being done right now by labor brokers, plumbing, mechanical, electrical. There's projects being done with people that don't even want to be here. They're actually being held kind of against their own will being here. And once again, this just kind of helps some folks keep doing those things. To be honest with you. Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to.
No, it's good. It's good context. I voted against it. We ended up having that added as an amendment at the very last minute onto truthfully a non-controversial bill. Some of the concerns that Jeff was bringing up were some of the ones that we had talked about, was just ensuring that any of these projects that we get done is done by qualified laborers and making sure that it gets done correctly. And I agree with you that I don't understand why we would want to remove the apprentices portion of this. It seemed like it was legislation going after unions. It was
It
kind
certainly
of my
feels
feeling
like it at
towards
times.
All right, thank you. Next question is from Deborah Irwin. It's concerning Doge. If Doge is the wrong way to change government, the governor needs a better and bigger view. Why aren't we making government effective and not efficient?
Well, to take on that point, I mean, when it comes to Doge on the federal level with President Trump, none of us have control over that. Okay, we don't control what's happening in the federal government. We have the same opportunity that all of you do to contact our congressional leaders, whether that be our representatives or 2 U.S. senators. In Iowa, we have to make government more efficient. That's why we went through government realignment. We went from 36 different agencies down to, what was it, Dan, 16, something like that. And that was 2 years ago. And then last year, we realigned our boards and commissions. We had so many boards and commissions out there that were archaic, obsolete. Some never met, some did meet, and all they did was talk. So we have tried to cut back on frivolous and or wasteful government entities that don't need to be there, and tax dollars don't need to be subsidizing them. But the work's never done. So we're going to continue to look at ways to make Iowa government more efficient, more taxpayer friendly, and get less burdensome, or get burdensome red tape out of the way as you live your life and make your own decisions.
I'm going to jump in there because, I mean, just to be for the record of what the governor's, I think this task force she wants to create on Doge hasn't even been stood up yet, right? So let's be clear, nothing's happening. That being said, I do think there's tremendous opportunity in what the governor is trying to steer the conversation for. I'm going to put on my property tax hat here real quick, right? Oftentimes, government at all levels get stuck in autopilot, right? Where it just continues to do the same thing over and over again. And there's very few times you see a refresh on that. When you look at the state of Iowa, just in this last census, and you can go back to the previous census, the last one in particular, while our population has slightly increased and will slightly increase every year one way or the other, if you look inside those numbers, I think it was around 80 counties in Iowa lost population. And some of that wasn't a first-time loss. That goes back to the 2010 census as well, too, right? And I'm particularly speaking when I talk about, what was being, this task force being proposed at the state level. I want to speak to the county level here real quick, right? And that's where I think the opportunity comes because, Josh or Matt or Dan, we can put a property tax bill together, and we can put one hell of a property tax bill together, and we can reform the system. But ultimately, the system has to change a little bit for us to get some really good relief out there. So when I talk about these smaller counties, right, I'm not picking on any entities in particular, but the reality is like some of these smaller counties do not have an ability to maintain their own public health department in perpetuity. They don't have an ability to maintain their own emergency management department in perpetuity, right? And that's where we see some good examples across the state. I was actually, ISAC came to the Capitol about 2 weeks ago, and I was talking to some supervisors out of Brent and Dare. And they have what's a 28E agreement between the two counties where they don't each have their own emergency management department. They have a dual county. And that came in very handy during the Greenfield tornado. I give that example to say, I think a lot of counties are going to need help in the 28E area and need help to synchronize their, some of these services, because the reality, you can probably reduce some redundancies in these areas and get a better bang for the buck in one form or fashion there, and ultimately lower people's property taxes in the end. I'm not picking on EMAs in particular, right? This is an issue we've had at the Capitol the last 2 years, where not every county needs to have, 2 search and rescue boats and 3 or 4 just random trailers sitting out back and a bunch of ATVs because they had some money left over at the end of the budget cycle and they just buy it. And invariably we hear all these complaints all the time. These things are just collecting dust, right? If a derecho hits Iowa, right, that's hitting more than just one county. That's hitting an area. If a flood happens to Iowa, it hits more than one county. It hits an area. So I think there are some opportunities to really take a look back at how these systems have been formed. Regionalized public health, 28Es between a couple of counties, right? That'd be something that'd probably really advantageous to. Let's think of our neck of the woods here. It seems like Fremont and Page County, right? Fremont's a very small county. They can probably get better bang for the buck out there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, not just for the services that we receive, but also I think property taxpayers too. If the discussion goes in the right way, it'll be a very helpful tool to really recalibrate what we're seeing, where people will just voluntarily move into larger urban areas, leave in rural areas. So I'm pretty hopeful on this.
I may differ from some in my party in that I actually think that we should be looking at ways to improve government efficiency and where it's not necessary. I think it's really important, actually. We need to be good stewards of people's tax dollars. I guess what I would say, again, none of us have anything to do with what's going on nationally with Musk or Doge, but the one thing that I would say is that if we are going to make cuts, I think we need to make that with a scalpel, not with a chainsaw. There seems to be an idea that just because it's government that it's bad. Well, the FAA, we all like to fly safely. It's very important. The FDA, pre-FDA, you didn't know what the heck you were eating if you were getting poisoned. I can tell you pre-EPA, the Cuyahoga River was on fire. And so some of these organizations are very, very important. And if we are going to make cuts, we need to be careful about making cuts and making sure that the most vulnerable in society are not the ones that are that are losing services or getting taken advantage of, especially when you start to talk about things like Medicare, Medicaid, something I care very deeply about. So we need to be careful of that. But I think that looking at government efficiencies is important, and I think we need to do a good job with it. Just very careful about how we do it.
Thank you. Our next question is from Diane Hathaway, concerning protecting nursing home residents. Her question: for the last 5 years, leadership in the legislature has failed to advance legislation to protect nursing home residents. Address the allegation that the protection of campaign contributions from the nursing home industry was prioritized over the well-being of defenseless residents.
I can go if you want me to. Okay. To address the allegations, all right. Running for office is not an easy task. You have to raise dollars. The allegation that some way that, because some individual is running for office received a campaign donation from one entity or another has in some way influenced our decision, it's just not like that in the Iowa legislature. Okay? But folks have been doing this a long time, especially in leadership. I have to raise a lot of money to help a lot of our candidates across the state be successful, get their message out, talk to their constituents. But there has not been a single time in my 19 years that I've had a piece of policy or a piece of budget come before me where I went back and looked at, well, who gave me what money? I don't care who gave me what money. When it comes to policy before us, if it's good public policy for Iowa, it moves forward. As far as protecting our residents in nursing homes, I addressed in one of our previous forums here. Yes, we have taken steps to try and address the most vulnerable and protect the most vulnerable among us. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Are there still problems within the system? Absolutely. And we're continually trying to find where we can have consensus to move forward to make sure those citizens in those vulnerable situations are protected. But there just hasn't come, there's no one silver bullet solution. So the allegation, again, that somehow a campaign donation has influenced the decision, I've never done it personally, and I've never seen that amongst my colleagues. I guess it happened. And like I said, I've been there almost 20 years. I've never come to me and go, well, hey, Mid-Am gave you this amount of money, so we can't vote on that energy policy, or we have to vote on that energy policy. That's just not part of the dialogue or the conversations that happen. Our motivations are very much constituent driven. Hey, I've got a constituent back home or a constituency group that really wants to see X, Y, or Z happen. So I can't speak for what happens in DC. Never been there, don't ever want to go there. But in Iowa politics, whether the Republicans or the Democrats, I have never seen that motivation.
Yeah, to dovetail off that too, we don't have super, I doubt any of us up here has a super PAC, right? The money at the state level is just nothing, it's a real thing in DC. I don't think any of us would even try to disagree with that there, but just the money mechanics at the state level is not even close to that there. And if there was any legislator that, that is going to sell their soul or change their vote for $1,000 PAC check, then they're probably not doing a good job up there in the first place. I'll tell you that, because there are other colleagues who can sniff them out pretty quick there as to what motivation to be, but I've never seen that up there at all. On the nursing home discussion there, really where it all comes down to is, I think we're 75% there on the issue on how there are some family members out there that would like to have some type of recording available to monitor their loved ones. And so it started off making the nursing homes pay for it. I think we've got now where, if someone wanted that, they would have to pay for it, right? They have to pay for the internet, they have to pay for the hardware, because there's just no way with the state of Iowa nursing homes right now you can force that out there, right? So I think that argument's been 75% of the way, but where the conversation comes now is a lot of these nursing homes, these are 2 or 3 bedroom areas, right? So how do you have privacy for the other persons in that room and, get some attention to the loved one there? And that's in these larger nursing homes, that's where the question of the problem comes from, so.
I'm gonna take this in two parts. On the first part, on the nursing home, and for those of you who attended this, this is something that I care very deeply about. This is a bill that I've personally sponsored, and this year I co-sponsored it with a member of the majority party, Brent. And I absolutely fundamentally believe that we have the protections and provisions in place now that we've got a good way to work with this. Iowa would be reinventing the wheel here. We've already got 20 states that are doing this. We have to do a better job of protecting the most vulnerable, which is the elderly and the intellectually and physically disabled that cannot speak up for themselves, and to be able to assure that there is not neglect or abuse taking place in these nursing homes. So as long as I'm in this role, I'm going to keep on sponsoring that bill and supporting that bill any way I can until we see it finish line. I think it's really, really important, something that we can do. And again, I think the bill that we have now, which is changed and evolved, I think that we have the privacy protections in place now for roommates, etc., making sure that the payment structure, all of those things are in place. Secondary issue is campaign finance. I really, really believe that if you want to clean this swamp up, and I mean from DC to here, we need campaign finance.
Yes.
We really have outside influence from these dark monies, super PAC money, nobody knows where it's coming from. And I'll agree with Representative Windschitl. I don't see anybody up at the Iowa House saying, oh, I took a $500 check, now I'm going to change my vote, now I want to hurt people. That's not happening. But I do think that we all have to recognize that there is some level of unsaid quid pro quo, and that if somebody gives me money or is supporting me, well, but by my very nature, I'm going to be less inclined to go against them. And I think even further, you know, we have lobbyists up at the Iowa House, far more. Jesus, what's happening up in DC, massive problem up there, is that what I see is, I don't see any lobbyists up at the Iowa House that are for homeless people, that are for disabled folks, that are for elderly individuals. I'm not seeing that. But I do see a lot of lobbyists for every other major business entity. And for me, what I think I've learned in my 3 years up there is, if you want to ask yourself, to some degree, not exclusively, but why legislation moves or does not move, oftentimes you can just follow the money or look at where the lobbyists are. That's not the way that the system should work. This should be a system of the people, for the people. We should be here exclusively just doing the role of what is best for the community, what is, we should be voting our conscience, voting our moral code, not just looking out for business interests. That's just my personal opinion. By saying that, I'm not implicating any of these gentlemen are doing that.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. Thank you, legislators. I'll turn it back over to Rachel.
Thank you.
Legislators for making a commitment to be here despite your busy schedules. Thank you again to Virginie for moderating. If our legislators are able to stick around, we will have a brief meet and greet. The next legislative copy will be 9 a.m. on Saturday.